This conference will now be recorded.
I believe Martha was planning on doing that, but I can do it if you like, whatever you like.
No, yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Either Martha, if that was you, then if you don't mind.
Sure, happy to. Okay, I'm going to read an opening statement and then give a little bit of instruction about the functionality of the software. So I'll start with the statement. Since the governor declared the state of emergency on March 12, 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, state and local government bodies have been providing for continuity of government by meeting remotely with telephonic or electronic means in compliance with Virginia Freedom of Information Act, guidance provided by the Attorney General and their respective legal counsel. On April 22nd, the General Assembly approved a budget amendment to authorize all public bodies, including regional bodies, such as PlanRVA, likewise, to meet by electronic means without a quorum, assembled together during a governor-declared state of emergency, as long as certain conditions are met, so as to provide for the continuity of governmental operations. This new authority became effective immediately upon passage. The 2020 COVID-19 virus makes it impractical and unsafe, even potentially life-threatening, for a quorum of this body to physically assemble in one location pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-7308 2A3. Further, the virus makes it impractical and unsafe for the public and the agency staff to gather in the same location to participate in this meeting. Health, safety, and welfare of our community is of paramount importance. Therefore, we have determined the authority to conduct today's meeting electronically pursuant to the provisions of Virginia Code Section 2.2-3708.2 and related legislation approved by the General Assembly of Virginia and in light of the Governor's state of emergency declaration for COVID-19. The matters included on the agenda address important and essential matters of continuing the work of government through this agency, and therefore it is appropriate to convene during this time. While we do not know the exact duration of the current practice of electronic meetings, we will continue to function in this manner until such time as it is deemed advisable to return to in-person meetings. At this time, we expect meetings to occur in electronic format through the current declaration or June 10th, 2020. Staff provided notice of this meeting and the means by which we are virtually gathered to members of the public on Monday, May 4th, 2020, through electronic posting on the PlanRVA website and email distribution of notice to all members, alternates, and known interested parties, including the media. In order to comply with the provisions of Virginia law and to improve accessibility to the discussions intended for today, this meeting will be recorded. All audio and visual recordings of the meeting and materials will be posted on the RVA website within 48 hours of this meeting. Any member of the public participating as an observer during this meeting today may submit comments or questions at any time during the meeting via email at info@planrva.org or by using the online chat functions of the meeting platform. Those individuals who are observing by phone may be called upon to share questions or comments. This meeting agenda includes 2 opportunities for members of the public to address this body. All comments and questions submitted during the meeting will be reviewed following the meeting, and to the extent practical, responses will be provided or posted on the PlanRVA website. We ask that everyone identify themselves first when speaking each time, so that we may more accurately record the activities of the meeting. All lines will be muted during the meeting by the administrator to minimize additional noise and feedback. Anyone might unmute their line at any time to request acknowledgement from the chair. Staff will be monitoring the chat functions throughout the meeting to assure that we do not overlook anyone wishing to participate as appropriate in the discussion. Our clerk I will now ask our clerk to certify we have followed the approved procedures for appropriate notice of this meeting and the means by which we are convening. Diane, can you confirm that, please?
Yes, confirming.
Thank you. Now she will call the roll. Please indicate your presence by saying aye when your name is called during the roll call. Staff members will be asked to identify themselves, and anyone else who wishes to identify themselves following the roll call of members will be invited to do so.
Mr. Coda, Mr. Winslow, Dr. Newbill,
I've unmuted Dr. Newbell. She's here, but
Present. Yes,
Thank
present.
you.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you. Mr. Spoonhour? Mr. Davis? Mr. Nelson?
Here.
Ms. Page? Mr. Norvig?
Aye.
Dr. Spagna?
Aye.
Thank you.
does anyone have any questions regarding the process for assuring effective facilitation or how members of the public may participate? Seeing none, I will tell you, Mr. Chair, that we do not have a quorum at this point in time. So I think under council, we can proceed with updating you on matters on the agenda, but the body cannot take any action.
That is correct.
Okay, let's do that, Martha, because I know at some point we're gonna have to get off of this call so that we can go over to the regular meeting. Anything that's pertinent on the agenda that you think updates are warranted for, can you just
Sure.
move forward with updating us on some things?
Yes, the majority of the agenda this morning is a review of the 9 o'clock meeting agenda. So I think we could forego that if that's okay with the members. I'll defer to Eric Gregory if he'd like to go forward with the updates on the charter amendment for those that are here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. The charter amendment update, I don't believe is on the full agenda, so we might as well update the executive committee for those members who are present at this time. Late last fall, the commission asked us to proceed with charter revision updates or charter update revisions. We circulated the draft updates that we recommended or suggested to the commission to legal counsel for the respective governing bodies. Just to get their feedback and make sure everybody was apprised of what the commission intended to do in the path forward. They had some time to look at that. I've followed up with them several times. At this point, I've heard from most of the member jurisdictions legal counsel. Only a couple I have not heard from. The feedback received to date is generally consistent, and I'll run through that. There are a few little things that some have mentioned, mostly clerical items, but these are the general points upon which there are consistent agreement among the legal counsel for the member jurisdictions that I've heard from thus far. And that's the majority of the member jurisdictions. On the office location, which is one of the main things that the commission desired to achieve, there appears to be consensus to remove the requirement that the commission office be located in the city of Richmond and in favor of it being in a centrally located location within the region, rather than requiring it to be in the city of Richmond. That would allow greater flexibility for the commission to locate its office outside the city and may provide more options for office space, meeting space, that kind of thing. So there's broad consensus in support of that change. The super vote, that's a term that is not actually in the charter, but it's been sort of used to refer to the provision in the charter under Article 2, Section 2 and Article 3, Section 2, allowing one of the elected official members of the commission to cast more than one voting seat if authorized by their respective member jurisdiction. Non-elected members, that is planning commission and citizen member representatives on the commission, would not have this authority. Feedback was largely in favor of this concept and the draft language that would authorize a quote super vote. As long as a quorum of commission members were present at a given meeting, it would allow an elected official member the ability to cast multiple votes representative of the member's jurisdiction and the voting seats that they hold. So there was largely consensus supportive of that revision. Alternate members, There was consensus that alternate members should remain limited to one alternate to serve in lieu of one of the elected officials per jurisdiction, and that is consistent with the Regional Cooperation Act language and a strict reading of that language, and I certainly concur with that. It was recommended that the alternate representing an elected official should be another elected official rather than a staff person or citizen, because the PDC has the authority to issue debt, and therefore those voting to do so should be elected officials, especially if they're empowered to cast a super vote, as noted earlier. The idea being that only elected officials should have the power or authority to vote to incur debt. That's not something that the commission does on a regular basis, but the commission does have that authority, and certainly respectful of that. That makes sense. So I'd certainly recommend that the commission proceed on that change. And then the position of chair. The reason for allowing chairpersons to be elected to serve more than one consecutive term was to allow continuity and also to provide an out if a newly elected official is in the rotation to take over as chair without having previously served on the board with no experience. But legal counsel for the member jurisdictions noted that this could preclude some jurisdictions from the chairmanship for up to 20 years. I would note that the chairmanship is always an elective position, and the rotation that the commission relies upon is not provided for in the charter or the bylaws. It is not a binding rotation. It is merely a convention of the organization that is followed for the most part, but it also allows for flexibility. Nevertheless, it certainly makes sense to ensure that there is as much potential for the rotation to be utilized as possible, and preventing consecutive terms for the chair is a way to achieve that. That way, you're basically building in some variety in the chair. That seems to be the preference of the legal counsel after having consulted with their respective governing bodies, and that's their recommendation. And I offer that to the commission for its consideration. The rest of the changes or the rest of the items identified by the respective legal counsel were mostly clerical changes and corrections and that kind of thing, which we'll certainly work on going forward. Nothing further to report this time. What we'll do now is do another draft based upon the input we've received to date and circulate to that to the commission for further consideration and review, and try to map out a path forward in the next steps. I expect if the commission is okay with that, we'll be able to start circulating it for consideration and action among the member jurisdictions over the summer. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Anyone have any questions for Eric? All right, so I would suggest, sir, as you indicated, to continue to work on that and bring it back to us at our next exec committee meeting, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir, I will do that.
All right, Martha, is there anything else? I know we have some, so I'm slightly concerned about the consent agenda items, because I think you were to present them to us and then we would recommend that they go on the consent agenda, right?
Yes, my thinking in trying to keep the meeting as efficient as possible, given the requirement to do a roll call verbal vote on each item, was to include the minutes from the March 13 full commission meeting, our rural transportation work program resolution of approval, and the personnel policies ratification for COVID-19, all to be included in the consent agenda. I hope that the executive committee would endorse that. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the full commission meeting, the members can, by vote, remove any items they'd like to from the consent agenda to treat individually. So absent an executive committee endorsement of inclusion of those items, we can certainly break the consent agenda items out and do each individually in the 9 o'clock meeting if that's the preference. Eric, does that sound right to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my preference would be to keep it in the consent agenda because with the roll call, we still, many folk plan 9 to 10:30
Right.
for our meetings, and I think the roll call will add time. And hopefully we'll have enough people to get started actually on time. So my preference would be to keep it as a consent agenda item, but I'll leave it up to the board. I think Norvid, Spagna, New Bill, you guys have any issues with it being consent agenda? And then if somebody has a problem or issue, we can take it out and make it a regular agenda item.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with the idea of it being a consent agenda. This is George Spagna, by the way. I do have a correction for the meeting minutes of the March 12th meeting. I don't know if I can submit that at this point, or if I need to pull that, if we need to pull the minutes out of the full commission meeting so I can make that correction.
And Mr. Chairman,
yeah.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
it's
go ahead,
Larry
Doug.
Norvig. And, we end up pulling things out of the consent agenda at our board meetings all the time. It's not really that clumsy to do. But what George just said, I'm going to second, because I would have to abstain from the minutes because I was not able to connect for the last month's meeting. So I would either have to pull that from the consent agenda or abstain from the entire consent agenda in order to make that vote, which seems kind of silly. So I don't know if we want the minutes to be in the consent agenda.
All right, duly noted. Dr.
I'm
Newbill.
fine with minutes I'm fine with the minutes being pulled for that reason, and then proceeding with the consent agenda for the full body to
Okay.
view and pull out as needed.
All right. So Eric, Martha, what do you think? We just pull the minutes
Yes, sir. That's perfectly fine.
and let the other two stay, and then if anybody has any questions or whatever, then we can do the same thing with the other two.
Yes, sir.
All right, Martha. I also see that I think Terry was on here for some financial management and budget amendments. Do you want to deal with that now? It's 8:48. Can she
I'll just simply say that the Finance Committee met more than a week ago now and reviewed the financial statements that Terry will review in the full commission meeting. The packet for the full commission meeting includes both February and March financial statements. She will give they're all in there. I think typically what we do in meetings is Dr. Spagna advises the group of that. If there are any questions, staff can respond to them. So the high level is that we are doing well, particularly well compared to budget this time of the year. The committee also took up the financial management procedures. Those are included in the full commission packet for reference only. It's not an action item. The committee is working with staff to just be able to document more of our procedures and processes internally for internal controls. But we did want to include that in there because those procedures inform the action item that is the budget amendment. And those amendments are also included in the full commission packet. They are there to be able to recognize awards of revenue that we have received in fiscal year 20. And so that will action to accept those budget amendments will incorporate those revenue sources in our future financial statements and be able to show more completely align financial statements to budget. So we can go over that in greater detail in the full 9 o'clock meeting, but that's the highlights of that section. I had hoped to talk this morning with executive committee members about next fiscal year's budget. Terry and I have been working with to put together the needed materials for that for presentation to the Finance Committee later this month, the Executive Committee in June, and the full commission in June for hopefully approval. Under non-COVID circumstances, we would be tracking to request authority to recruit additional personnel for our staff in the coming fiscal year by virtue of conversion of one position from part-time to full-time and creation of 2 positions for our staff, largely due to the projected workflow that we have over the next 2 years and the funding that comes along with that. I had hoped today we could get a little bit of a sense from the executive committee whether that is a topic you are interested in considering. There's a lot of information that we can provide to you about that, but I can appreciate that during this time when localities are making very difficult personnel related position decisions, we want to be sensitive to that. At the same time, our staff is to the max as far as assignments go, and we, in order to complete the work that we have ahead for the next 2 years, we believe, I think it's the consensus of the leadership team, that we need additional personnel to be able to carry that load.
So, I'll leave it up to you guys. If anyone has anything that they wanted to interject real quickly before we end this call, I think it's you want to go organization by organization as it relates to the needs of the organization. I do think it's most of our localities probably have hiring freezes right now. So I'm not, I don't want to speak for anybody else. If there's an organizational need at the PDC and we need to fill spaces right now, then I'm actually open to considering that, but also being sensitive to where our localities are, and most of them have put hiring freezes on at this moment until we get into a better place economically, locally, and as a country. Anybody else want to take a share word?
This is George Spagna, Mr. Chairman. I'm sympathetic with the need for additional staff to do the workload. A question I have for Ms. Heater, is this work that would be taking place immediately in the new fiscal year, or is this work anticipated for, say, the second or third quarter of the fiscal year?
It's a great question. It's a mix. We are expecting and have been expecting since the beginning of March award from FEMA for our update to our regional hazard mitigation plan. That is a project that once awarded, we need to initiate immediately. We think to stay on track with the project deadline, we need to start that project by August. And so we're anxiously awaiting the documentation from FEMA and the Department of Emergency Management. As you can imagine, the current pandemic, I think, has slowed their internal processes for that. That is largely work that would be supported by the conversion of the part-time position to the full-time position. The other 2 positions we do think we could delay. And one scenario that Terry and I have spoken about is that we could come back to this board in the next quarter and in subsequent quarters to reevaluate the prudence of the creation and recruitment for those 2 positions. Right now, our budget contemplates those 2 positions would not come on board until October 1 and April 1 of next calendar year. So we have already kind of considered the work and how that could be absorbed in the budget. The 2 new positions are, I'll say, not needed, we believe, until later in the fiscal year.
Mr. Chairman, Larry Nordvig.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to kind of echo both of you, I guess. In Powhatan, we are right in the midst of doing the budget. In fact, we vote on the school portion tonight, and we're doing everything we can to avoid layoffs, both on the county and the school side. And we too have a freeze on hiring, with the exception that we need a county administrator, and we're actually doing interviews later this month. So I'm kind of both there, where I think we have to be very, very careful about the optics and about obviously the money when it comes to hiring or raising somebody from part-time to full-time. On the other hand, if you need the position, you need the position in order to function. So what we're doing in Powhatan is we are basically meeting monthly specifically with the budget updates in mind. And if we need to appropriate money month by month by month in order to keep up with whatever happens to the economy this year, that might not be a bad way to approach this on the PlanRVA side, is just go month by month by month. You know, if we had hoped to hire somebody in the second quarter or third quarter of the fiscal year and things just aren't working out that way, then, you know, we would know that by keeping up month by month. So maybe some sort of rigorous update. That's my comment.
So in the interest of time, could Terry and I put together some sort of scenario like that where we could keep this discussion alive while proceeding with the budget process? And we could present that to the Audit, Facilities, and Finance Committee later this month, and come back to the Executive Committee next month with maybe a more detailed phased approach.
Yeah, I think.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
I would support that recommendation, just all considered, without, we're same thing in the city, you know, in terms of budget cuts, et cetera. So I would support that approach that Mark had just recommended.
I agree, Dr. Newbell. Let's Martha, let's do that. Then you circle back with the committee, okay?
Will do.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for jumping on. We do have a 9 o'clock meeting. Hopefully, all of you are just going to end this call and jump on that one. It's a different meeting ID, so refer to your agenda, 592034269.
Mr. Chairman?
It's not the same. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, George Spagna here. The agenda packet that went out for the PlanRVA full commission meeting has a different number on it than the one that went out earlier. The agenda gives the same meeting ID as this meeting.
Okay, Martha, what's the packet that I have actually has a different ID meeting. So what's the deal?
It should be 592034269.
All right, you got that, Spagna?
Yeah, I have that number. I'm just saying that I downloaded the agenda from the website, and the agenda website gives the same number as this meeting. So.
All right, well, hopefully we may have to somebody from staff may have to circle back to this meeting ID at 9 and just make sure there's no stragglers over here. Okay. All right, let's end this call, and I'll see you guys in a few.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.